It is my privilege to introduce Steve Montgomery. He is the director of Lamppost Farm. That's out in Columbiana, Ohio. Steve's vocational career started, I believe, at Westminster College. He served for a number of years as the director of outdoor education, like a challenge course, alongside of a campus ministry organization. And about 15 years ago, Steve moved his family from New Wilmington, thanks, out to Columbiana, Ohio, to start Lamppost Farm. There's a big story that I'm sure if you want to know, he'll tell you the story of how he came to the farm, started the farm with like-minded folks ready to engage in an experience of community and food and culture, and working really hard to understand what it means to farm in alignment with God's creation. So I met Steve and his wife Mel 15 years ago. They came to speak at the City House, which is a project that I'm involved with. And when I first heard them talk about Lamppost Farm and food, I thought, I don't get it. I have no idea what this is about. But something about their approach and their vision really, really drew me in. And so they became regular speakers for us at the City House. And for the past 10 years or so, the City House students have spent a weekend out at Lamppost Farm. We get to stay in their cabin. We get to help with chores and move the cows, move the chickens, move the turkeys. I don't usually mess with the animals. It's not my thing. But I watch the students do it, and it's really fun. And we also get to sit around the dining room table with Steve and Mel and hear their story and hear their vision for Lamppost Farm. I must have lingered around long enough because about 5 years ago, I was invited to be a board member at Lamppost. And so it's been a real honor and privilege to be more of a part of the inner workings of the farm and their decision making and a part of their vision for the years ahead. And so I've loved the time that I've been able to spend both at the farm and with Steve and Mel, and being able to kind of hear and understand and walk alongside their vision for the farm. The name Lamppost Farm comes from the Chronicles of Narnia series. You might be familiar with that. On their website, Steve writes this. He says, "As Lucy emerges from the wardrobe into a snow-covered forest, a lamppost stands among the trees. It marks the entrance into a new world where life is different. Lamppost Farm wants to offer an entry point into a transformative experience as you explore life around you. Buy some of your food and learn and grow." I think that's exactly what Steve is up to at Lamppost. So please join me in welcoming my friend Steve Montgomery.
Well, having Wendy on our board is such a privilege. I'm going to move forward since that works. And that way I can be closer to everybody. Hope that doesn't throw you off, Chris. You're good. Okay. Wendy's wisdom and encouragement. She's a phone call away and has been a real source of kind of maybe a crutch at times, and also a hand around the shoulder, and just helping us decipher where we're going, as she also is, part of this process, which is a huge part of it. So we're thankful that she serves with us as well as here. And so I'm also super thankful to be here with my wife, Mel. As I was sitting here watching some of you all come in, people I haven't seen in a long time, and some people that I'm very familiar with, I started to go, oh my goodness, I sure hope that this works. Brad asked, when I finished my PowerPoint or something like that. Full disclosures, Mel and I were working on the details of this talk on the way over here. And that's kind of how it works for me. It's not that I didn't think about it for the last month. It's that, the pieces finally came together, I think, today, about 5:40. That's what the timestamp is on the document that I sent to Wendy. So the mission of Lamppost Farm in Columbiana, we're right on Route 7 near Shaker Woods, just a mile north of the 7 and 14 intersection. The mission is using agriculture to reach and teach others. There it is again. We're a 501c3 organization that we started the 501c3 in 2010 after moving there in 2007 and kind of getting the farm to a place where it was time to become an organization. Our mission, as I said, is to reach and teach through agriculture. And we, being the former director of what was called Titan Traverse at Westminster College, we used experiences in the wilderness and on the ropes course to open people's eyes to new ways of thinking about themselves, others, the world around them, and God that created it all. And so our lives were kind of turned upside down in 2000 when my dad, who was 48 years old, was diagnosed with colon cancer. And 2 years later, he ended up passing away. And we started asking the questions of why? How does this happen to somebody that's healthy, relatively healthy? And we started to discover that the food system is really devoid of life and of vitality. And so Mel and I started with a couple other friends talking about what would it look like to kind of transition from campus ministry and running this wilderness education program, use those skills, but do it in a way that we could grow and work a farm beside people, make that the classroom rather than rock climbing or caving. And so that's what we set out to do. And we ended up in Columbiana in 2007. As Wendy said, it's Lamppost Farm's named after the lamppost in the Chronicles of Narnia. That's actually the scene from the movie, an entry point into a new world, a way of seeing life differently. That's my bride, Mel, and in different places. Our Farmageddon was a food truck thing that many of you actually were there. We had food trucks and breweries paired together, doing a contest, cooking our meats and brewing a beer that complemented that. That was a fun event. It was about 110 degrees that day. These are our four kids, Nate, Drew, Amelia, and Lucy. They're all now up and out of the house. But those are pictures from the past of...
Actually our house in the middle.
That we renovated. Yes, we moved into a house that needed about $150,000 worth of renovation and work on. And that was in the process of it. And this is our staff, our team at Lamppost. In the middle is Marnie Broderick. Marnie actually owns the farm and was the one that invited us to come to that property and set up shop and begin to do what we do. And I won't name everybody in there, but our garden manager's there, and our livestock manager is there, and our discipleship coordinator's there. And we have a really fun team. And so we get to do life together. It's not just Mel and I anymore. For a long time it was. And so we're finally have other feet on the ground and are able to set me free to do this kind of thing, which I'm excited about. At Lamppost, we raise pastured poultry, grass-fed beef, grass-fed lamb, produce. We do pastured pork as well. I'll talk a lot more about that in a minute. But those are the animals that we grow, and growing animals on pasture creates an entirely different product, one that's healthy, that's really good for people to eat. The fats are actually like restorative fats. And so, yeah. And one other thing that I'll say is like the models by which we use are low stress environments. And that low stress, so the cattle, I listened to a podcast this past summer with our interns, and this podcast said cattle actually want to be called, not driven. But the dominant model is we drive cattle, right? But when they're moved, they know the handlers. They want to be called to the next piece of ground because they're designed to move around the farm. This is one of our bulls that we had, anyway, he was as gentle as a lamb. So I want to define this or ask this question. define the term, what is relationship? Tonight I'm going to talk a lot about relationship because that's like at the fabric of everything we do. Relationship is the mechanism of interconnectedness. Let me say that again. Relationship is the mechanism of interconnectedness. We are in relationship to the air we breathe, to the lights that are on, to the electricity that powers those lights. We're in relationship to one another. And so it's the mechanism that I want to talk about, right? Relationships is the web of those mechanisms. And that's just to make that distinction. We'll catch up with that again. So let's talk about food. Why eat and what it says about us. Okay, I have a few questions for you. Let me make sure I can see my notes here before I get too far ahead of myself. What's your favorite holiday food? Throw them out. Cookies. Any specific kind? I'm with you. Is there a specific holiday you associate with that? Yeah, good. Me too. That's awesome. Somebody else. Turkey, meatballs, right? Mashed potatoes, corn casserole, right on. What else? Green beans. We have lots of holiday food things we think about. That when we think, oh man, Thanksgiving's coming up. I can't wait to smell or taste. These are my two favorites from Thanksgiving. Baked pineapple that my mom makes and a turkey roll. So we de-breast our turkey. This was actually Jason Benegassi from Beaver told me this. Pound out the breast flat, put herbs in, butter, roll it up and tie it and bake it. It's unbelievable. It's just like a pumpkin roll, only it's made out of turkey. What's one food that you love that most people do not? Blue cheese. Okay. Green bean casserole. There you go. Good. It's awesome. What else? Seaweed. Yep, she does. Seaweed. What else? What's a food you love that most people do not? Olives. Yeah, all right. Good. That's out there. What else? Sardines. There you go. Definitely in a boat by yourself for very few. Meadows Scrapple is mine, right? So specifically the Meadows brand Scrapple. And the reason is my grandmother was a Meadows. And so I grew up eating Meadows Scrapple, which is, if you read the label, it says the first ingredient is pork broth, cornmeal, pork, livers, pork, and then it goes on and on. But specifically, they have buckwheat in there, buckwheat flour in the Meadows brand Scrapple. And then you slice it and fry in a pan and put maple syrup on it with eggs, and it's really good. Most people don't think that. We actually made that one time. We got the recipe from my family, made it at home when we processed pigs, and it turned out pretty good. It was fantastic, actually. We just made a lot, probably too much. Okay, tell me some foods to avoid on a date. A burger, good. Garlic, another one, yes. What else? Saucy spaghetti, sure. Anything else? What else? Sorry? What was that? Beans. Yeah, good. Well, at least if it's going to be a long night, yes. What else? Poppy seeds. Ah, you got it. There you go. Okay, I got a few. I looked up a website. I started like, okay, how about some date foods that we don't want to, do? And I found this website that was a kind of a woman's help website called Women Nightly. Okay. The first one that they talked about, spinach. I'm going to read a few of these. Most girls are trying to keep their calorie intake under control. But first of all, little disclosure, this is not my opinion. Okay. just so you know. Even on a first date, they opt for spinach smoothies, soups, and salads without realizing those healthy meals can ruin their pearly white teeth. Moreover, guys don't want to know if you're on a diet or simply trying to eat healthy, so opt for a fruit smoothie instead of a green one. All right? Great advice. Pesto. Pesto is a quick, easy way to add flavor without lots of unwanted calories to your favorite meal, but this sauce must be eaten at home only. Avoid a dating disaster by avoiding eating pesto on a date. It's delicious and healthy, but your date may not like its smell and those pieces of food stuck in your teeth. That's a good one. A burger, right? Hamburgers are huge, literally. They are bigger than your mouth, and it's almost impossible to eat them politely. If your date wants to order hamburgers and you really want to eat in front of your guy, don't forget to use a knife and fork. I'm not writing this stuff, but so the point is, food comes with a whole lot of stigma, right? The last one, this was number 6 on the list of top 10. I couldn't believe it. Milkshakes and any dairy can wreck your digestive system, and you can end up going to a ladies' room the whole evening. Dairy can also cause bloating and loud tummy gurgling. It's worse than any piece of food stuck in your teeth. Wow. All right. There's some dating advice right there. How about rules for dating and eating? Not to leave the men out. Okay, this is a men's website, the new rules for dating and eating from a website called First We Feast. Choosing a restaurant. First things first, do not hit up Yelp for a romantic restaurant and call it a day. You'll end up in a red velvet lined basement where the flickering candles won't be dim enough to mask the look of disappointment on your date's face. If you're a regular at a particular restaurant, that's always a good option, but don't make a big deal about it before you get there. Let the special treatment be a surprise and act mildly embarrassed. Okay, ordering a meal. Everyone knows that confidence is sexy, but what you don't realize is that confidence gets played out at the table too. Not just when you're picking a restaurant, but how you act while you're there. It's shocking how many people lose their swag just by ordering. They hem and haw over what they want. They ask the waiter what he likes or what of the 3 things they're debating between is best. This guy does that all the time. I asked Mel, are you embarrassed? And she's like, it just takes you a while. There's no good answer for you here, and the longer you can't make up your mind, the longer your date has to rethink the whole night. If you really don't have a clue what to make of the menu in front of you, limit yourself to 2 questions and make them targeted. After that, pick something and cross your fingers. Ordering drinks. When it comes to cocktails, so many people are stuck in their routine. Whether it's bourbon, tequila, or Chardonnay, everyone has the booze he falls back on whenever faced with too many choices. There's something suspiciously stubborn about someone who orders a vodka tonic in a bar known for its tequila selection. If your date is a drinks person too, they're going to spot that crutch right away and wonder what other ruts you've fallen into. And mind your manners. Here's the hamburger one. If you can't relax in front of your date enough to pick up a burger and eat it the way nature intended, how are you ever going to let your guard down? Ordering on a date can be a game of chicken. Whoever orders first gets to set the standard for the evening. Go big and messy and show that you're not afraid of looking a fool for a few minutes in order to have a good time. More likely than not, your date's just going to be relieved she can now order wings. And can we once and for all kill the idea that women have to pretend they don't have an appetite? There's so much involved in food. Okay, there we go. So what does this tell us about food and eating? Eating is an intimate act that demands we be vulnerable. Right? We're taking food, I said this in the promo that Wendy put out. We're taking something completely not us, opening our face, and putting that odd something else into us in front of another person, right? We don't necessarily think about food and eating like this too often. We had a conversation with our daughters this morning about that. She's like, my friends never think about this. Exactly. We don't think about it, but it is an intimate act, right? Avoid opportunities that allow food to produce shame and exposure. In other words, learn to hide, right? These are some of the things that come with food. I'm not saying that that's a good thing at all. All right, story time. This is from The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, which is C.S. Lewis's book. They call it book 1 in the Chronicles of Narnia series. I actually think it's book 2 because I'm a purist. Just kidding. Magician's Nephew came first, and that's how the Lamppost was established and Narnia was created. And then this in the series comes next. And this is the story where these 4 siblings, Peter, Edmund, Susan, and Lucy, enter Narnia and are making their way around. And it's covered in snow. This white witch queen is ruling this place. And Edmund has been there with Lucy before. And Edmund ate Turkish delight from the queen, from the white witch. And she promised him a whole bunch of things if he brings his siblings back. And Lucy meets another talking beast in Narnia called Tumnus, and finds that he's incredible, like gentle goat man, half goat, half man. And so here they're back coming into Narnia, and they discover the Beavers, Mr. and Mrs. Beaver, okay? They were standing at the edge of a narrow valley at the bottom of which ran, at least it would have been running if it hadn't been frozen, a fairly large river. Just below them, a dam had been built across the river, and when they saw it, everyone suddenly remembered that, of course, beavers are always making dams, and felt quite sure that Mr. Beaver had made this one. They also noticed that he had now had a sort of modest expression on his face, the sort of look people have when you are visiting a garden they've made or reading a story they've written. So it was only common politeness when Susan said, "What a lovely dam." And Mr. Beaver didn't say, "Hush," this time, but merely a trifle, and it isn't really finished. Above the dam, there was what ought to have been a deep pool, but now, of course, a level floor of dark green ice. And below the dam, much lower down, was more ice, but instead of being smooth, this was all frozen into the foamy and wavy shapes in which the water had been rushing along at the very moment when the frost came. And where the water had been trickling over and spilling through the dam, there was now a glittering wall of icicles, as if the side of the dam had been covered over with flowers and wreaths and festoons of the purest sugar. And out in the middle and partly on the top of the dam was a funny little house shaped rather like an enormous beehive. And from the hole in the roof, smoke was going up, so that when you saw it, especially if you were hungry, you at once thought of cooking and becoming hungrier than you were before. That was what the others chiefly noticed, but Edmund noticed something else. A little lower down the river, there was another small river, which came down another small valley to join it. And looking up that valley, Edmund could see 2 small hills, and he was almost sure they were the 2 hills which the White Witch had pointed out to him when he parted from her at the Lamppost the other day. And then between them, he thought, must be her palace, only a mile off or less, and he thought about Turkish delight and about being a king. And I wonder how Peter will like that, he asked himself, and horrible ideas came into his head. "Here we are," said Mr. Beaver, "and it looks as if Mrs. Beaver is expecting us. I'll lead the way. Be careful and don't slip." The top of the dam was wide enough to walk on, though not for humans. A very nice place to walk because it was covered with ice, and though the frozen pool was level with it on one side, there was a nasty drop to the lower river on the other. Along this route, Mr. Beaver led them in a single file out to the middle where they could look a long way up the river and a long way down it. And when they had reached the middle, they were at the door of the house. "Here we are, Mrs. Beaver," said Mr. Beaver. "I've found them. Here are the sons and daughters of Adam and Eve." And they all went in. The first thing Lucy noticed as she went in was a burring sound, and the first thing she saw was a kind-looking old she-beaver sitting in the corner with a thread in her mouth, working busily at her sewing machine, and it was from it that the sound came. She stopped her work and got up as soon as the children came in. "So you've come at last," she said, holding out both her wrinkled old paws. "At last! To think that I should ever live to see this day. The potatoes are on boiling and the kettle's singing, and I dare say, Mr. Beaver, you'll get us some fish." "That I will," said Mr. Beaver, and he went out of the house. Peter went with him. And across the ice of the deep pool to where he had a little hole in the ice, which he kept open every day with his hatchet, they took a pail with them. Mr. Beaver sat down quietly at the edge of the hole. He didn't seem to mind its being so chilly. Looking hard into it, then suddenly shot in his paw, and before you could say Jack Robinson, had whisked out a beautiful trout. Then he did it all over again until they had a fine catch of fish. Meanwhile, the girls were helping Mr. Beaver to fill the kettle and lay the table and cut the bread and put the plates in the oven to heat and draw a huge jug of beer for Mr. Beaver from a barrel, which stood in one corner of the house, and to put on the frying pan and get the dripping hot. Lucy thought the Beavers had a very snug little home, though it was not at all like Mr. Tumnus's cave. There were no books or pictures, and instead of beds, there were bunks, like on a board ship, built into the wall, and there were hams and strings of onions hanging from the roof, and against the walls were gum boots and oilskins and hatchets and pair of shears and spades and trowels and things for carrying mortar in, and fishing rods and fishing nets and sacks. And the cloth on the table, though very clean, was very rough. Just as the frying pan was hissing nicely, Peter and Mr. Beaver came in with the fish, which Mr. Beaver had already opened with his knife and cleaned out in the open air. You can think of how good the new-caught fish smelled while they were frying, and how the hungry children longed for them to be done, and how very much hungrier they had become before Mrs. Beaver said, "Now we're nearly ready." Susan drained the potatoes and then put them all back in the empty pot to dry on the side of the range while Lucy was helping Mrs. Beaver to dish up the trout. So at in a very few minutes, everyone was drawing up stools. It was all three-legged stools in the Beaver's house, except for Mrs. Beaver's own special rocking chair beside the fire. And preparing to enjoy themselves. There was a jug of creamy milk for the children. Mr. Beaver stuck to beer. And a great big lump of deep yellow butter in the middle of the table, from which everyone took as much as he wanted to go with his potatoes, and all the children thought, and I agree with them, that there's nothing to beat good freshwater fish if you eat it when it has been alive half hour ago and has come out of the pan half a minute ago. And when they had finished the fish, Mr. Beaver brought unexpectedly out of the oven a great and glorious sticky marmalade roll, steaming hot, and at the same time moved the kettle onto the fire so that when they had finished the marmalade roll, the tea was ready to be poured out. And when each person had got his or her cup of tea, each person shoved back his or her stool so as to be able to lean against the wall and gave a long sigh of contentment. "And now," said Mr. Beaver, pushing away his empty beer mug and pulling his cup of tea toward him, "if you'll just wait till I've got my pipe lit up and going nicely, why, now we can get to business. It's snowing again," he added, cocking his eye to the window. "That's all the better, because it means we shan't have any visitors, and if anyone should have been trying to follow you, why, he won't find any tracks." Edmund, who has already been in Narnia once before and had met the White Witch and eaten her food, slipped away after dinner and headed toward her castle. And I'll continue in chapter 9. And now, of course, you want to know what happened to Edmund. He had eaten his share of the dinner, but he hadn't really enjoyed it because he was thinking all the time about Turkish delight. And there's nothing that spoils the taste of good, ordinary food half so much as the memory of bad magic food. That was the story that kept coming to mind. I mean, we're in a library, so I figured, why not read it? That's the story that kept coming to mind as I was thinking about what's up with our food system. This contrast between good, ordinary food and bad magic food. But the reality is that's a microcosm of our lives. Good, ordinary friendships, bad magic friendships. Good ordinary work, bad magic work, right? Agriculture has taught me what good ordinary food is. Here's a picture of our cattle grazing, and in the foreground is a manure pile. Most of our job working animals is manure distribution. We control where they leave their remains or their waste. I put this up here because I want to ask the question, what's a cow's purpose? I mean, it's a rhetorical question for tonight, but it's a question that I ask all the time. I would say if most people are asked to give me an answer, what's a cow's purpose? It's either milk or meat, right? I don't think that's the case. I think cows are designed to eat grass. They're four-chambered stomachs. Okay, there we go. They have four stomachs within them, and the first one is called the rumen. The rumen is about 75% of the carrying capacity of their entire stomach. And that's where when they eat grass, it goes into them. You've heard the term ruminate. They lay down or they stand around and they bring it back up and they chew on it, chew their cud. They chew on it. We do this all the time. They swallow it back down, back into that big tank of microbial bacteria that gets basically dipping that grass back in. They bring it back up. They chew on it again. They ruminate back and forth and back and forth and back and forth until it's able to be digested and moves on to the second chamber, which is the reticulum, and then into the omasum, and then into the abomasum, and then out the back end, right? 4 chambers of stomachs that these animals have, and 80% of what they eat goes out the back end is fertility. We use them for the wrong things in our country. They are the fertility gift to the land, right? We talk about cow farts and how they are climate change enemies. Grass is one of the fastest producing carbon sources that leave roots in the ground. So when they're eaten by cows, they shed the roots off. Those roots become feed for the microbes that live there. The poop comes along, becomes feed for the microbes. The next time the cows come around to that spot, the poop's gone because the soil has eaten it. And it's growing better grass the next time around, right? Cattle are the solution to our climate change issue because they're designed to fit that process. And because grass can grow so fast and regenerate so fast, it deposits carbon over and over and over and over. That carbon in the soil is a gift. We can talk about that a little more. Agriculture is all about relationship. Here's 2 pictures. It's not the same picture, but it's taken the same day. Penny is our dairy cow. She's half Jersey, half Devon. Devon's the beef that we raise. Jersey's the milk. So we tied Penny up. She would come in the barn, turn and go right down the stall. We'd hook her up, and then I'd get underneath with a pail and pull. And it's just like 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, over and over and over. And you get in a rhythm about milking, right? Well, one day I had just read the night before this story about a study done at the University of Newcastle in England. And in that study, they had dairy cattle. So they had a whole herd. They gave half the herd names, and they gave half the herd numbers. The ones that were numbered would come in and they would track how much milk each numbered cow produced. And the ones that had names would come through the door and they would say, "Hi, Penny. Hi, Boxy. Come on in," and call them by name intentionally every day. The named animals produced significantly more milk than the numbered ones. There's something about relationship that's very significant to the design of these animals and the design of agriculture, right? When a steward is in relationship with the animals, they come alive. This is a calf drinking off of one of our moms, right? This is her calf. And when they're born, their gestation's the same as humans, 9 months. But they take 30 minutes to get to their feet and eat, right? Like humans are a lot longer than that. But when a calf comes in, they will find the mom's udder. And if she's a good mom, she actually facilitates that. But they'll come alongside and by smell, find the teats and then start to drink. They too have 4-chambered stomachs. And they're at that age, all 4 chambers are the same size. So I said the rumen is 75%. Well, they don't have anything to ruminate on, right? So their rumen is 25%. Every other chamber is 25%. When they tip their head like this and start sucking, I'm going to have to put the mic down to show you this. That's okay. When they tip their head down and start sucking under their mom, that sucking motion takes the lining of their esophagus. It's called the esophageal groove. A flat thing that if we dissected that animal and laid its stomach out, you wouldn't see it. But you can see it through ultrasounds. When they start sucking in that motion, a channel turns and forms in the esophagus, right from the end of the esophagus, and goes directly to the abomasum. That's unbelievable. The temperature of the abomasum and the acid in that stomach matches the temperature of the milk in mom, and then that divides into curds and whey. So at that point, the fat separates from the protein, and the whey gets absorbed as instant energy, and the fat is there as a long-term energy source. That's all about relationship. And it has to do with the posture of the calf in relationship to the mom. Look at how it's built. Its shoulder is that high. It has to dive under and tip its head. And that sucking motion causes that esophageal groove to come out. It blew my mind when I understood this. It points to this idea that it's all about relationship. Here's Mel and I with our firstborn in 1997. Let me see. That's all I'm going to say about that right now. Life is all about relationship. I think we're in the midst of a relationship drift, right? And we have been through all of history, right? This isn't new. It just seems like it's going fast. Some of the things on here, I put up a bunch, right? Can you tell me what town that is in the middle? Probably not. Every town, right? Right. There's not a uniqueness to this at all. The Burger King slogan, have it your way, which they've done away with, by the way. The extra value meal. What extra value do you get for that meal? The rotary phone, you know? I mean, okay, how many people here can remember their phone number when they were kids? Right. How many people remember their sister's phone number or brother's phone number? I don't. Good, nice job. The point is we don't have to do it, right? So we lose it. We understand. There's an antenna on a chimney, right? I lived in Bedford, Pennsylvania. It's where I grew up. And we had the rotor. And so we had to point to Altoona to watch the Steelers game. Unless they were on NBC, then we point to Johnstown, right? Or we point to Cumberland for some reason. I'm not sure why. All these other examples. How about a flush toilet, a self-flushing toilet? We don't even have to turn around anymore, right? I'm in the business of managing manure. I actually think that's a good thing. I'm not saying these advances aren't bad, but it's changing the way we know ourselves and the world around us, right? Are we moving toward bad magic food? Is this the Turkish delight? I know the temptation of Turkish delight. hypothetically. I don't like Turkish Delight as a food, but I understand the temptation that comes with bad magic food. The want to not have to do what I have to do to get what I need to do. You know what I mean? It's not forming me to do bad magic food. I'm not being formed or shaped or molded. I mean, sometimes maybe I am, but in the wrong direction. Food is all about relationship. Goût de terroir. Who knows what that is? It's a taste of place. It's a French term for how they understand wine, and where the grapes are grown for wine carry a different expression of that. So a taste of place. That actually is, look it up. There's all kinds of stuff they talk about this in France all the time. It's finally starting to come into the language of how we talk about local food. And I think that's a really good thing, because the taste of place has a lot of influence. Climate changes terroir. Terrain changes terroir. Is it north or south facing? Is it high altitude or low? Soil, the rock and mineral deposits, the density of the soil. Is it clay or is it organic? Is it loamy? Is it sandy? Tradition, techniques, and winemaker change. The tastes of place are expressed all over the place. We have it here in Beaver Falls. You do, right? There's no secret when a producer knows their product, cultivates it in the best terroir, and respects it enough to harvest it, respecting the seasons, the result is simply exceptional. Fort and Vert is the website I looked up on. This is my friend Jared. He's one of the owners of Birdfish Brewery and over in Columbiana. And Jared is, he's a scientist. He's so detail-oriented. And he talks about the water profile of using Columbiana City water to brew Birdfish beer. And he talks about, I can do reverse osmosis, which is this bottom thing says, treatment of brewing water sources using reverse osmosis makes brewing of any kind of beer in any region possible. I don't think Jared would agree with that fully, because I think he would say it makes it more difficult. Right? So he adds certain things if he wants to brew an ale or an IPA. If he wants to brew a stout, he can't do reverse osmosis at all. Right? And this right sign here says that in Dublin, Ireland, the hard water makes the perfect stout. Right? That's why Guinness is such a Dublin-oriented product. The taste of place. Being able to take the water from certain wells and make that into something else. And it's a combination of all these things that make Birdfish beer really good. Here's another example of a brewing process at Allagash Brewery. It's called Cool Ship Brewing. They do it in the fall where it's open fermented. They have a pan. They pour the wort in out of the mash tun. Right? It's this thing where they boil the grains and then move the water out. And it sits in this open pan with the windows open in the fall of the year, and the wild yeasts of Maine come in and ferment it overnight. And then they put it into casks and barrels the next day, and it sits there for over a year. That's the process of Belgian beer that the owners of Allagash and a couple other breweries went over to Belgium and met with some of these amazing brewers. And that's what they do. And so the Belgian Lambic gets its unique character from the wild yeasts that come in the windows. Taste of place, right? This is a reality of how space and place interact. We do pizza picnics at Lamppost, right? Some of you have been there. The pizza ovens, the 2 cob ovens we have, we dug the clay out of the soil across the street from the house. About 4 feet down, we started hitting clay, and with the backhoe, we got into some really neat looking blue clay for this one. And then when we went back to build the second one a few years later, we were up in the field probably another 50 feet or so, and the clay was red. It was amazing, right? And you mix that with sand and straw, and we built these bake ovens. And on the pizzas are our local ingredients. We've even started to use, on occasion, if I can get Mel to agree with it, einkorn flour that's grown organically in Ohio. Or einkorn is one of the most ancient of grains, and the flavor profile of that is off the hook. It's so good. Food is all about relationship. Right, back to Penny. When I was sitting there thinking about this story of this test that was done in England about, naming of cattle, it dawned on me, Penny was one of 3 cattle that my kids drank milk from over the course of 13 years. 3. How many cows are represented in a gallon of milk that you get at the store? Who knows? How many cows are represented in a pound of ground beef? Right? Food is all about relationship. There is something significant, I think, I don't know what it is, to the fact that we have been drinking from one cow. Or if you have a local farmer, which you do, right? Broad Run, Nature's Way, there's a couple other really good farms around here that do raw milk and sell right from their farm. So they might have 40 cattle they're milking together. That's still amazing because you're getting it from one place. Okay. Life is all about relationship. Relationship means that we affect and are affected. Right? So we're milking Penny. She's giving us milk. We're affecting her. Okay, Penny's now been processed in his hamburger and long gone. Okay, so there's been effect there. Relationship means we affect and are affected. As a result, we're dependent in those relationships. Because of the nature of relationship and the interplay that we're affected and we affect, that creates a dependence. Like I said, cattle want to be led, not driven, right? They want to see us open the gate and they want to go eat. So they're dependent on us and we're dependent on them. When we moved to Lamppost, one of our friends that moved us, she was an older lady. She said, "Steve, farmers pray more than anyone I know." And my first response, I was, in my early 30s, never farmed before. I said, well, that's because they're desperate. Now I understand that I think that what she was talking about is the dependence. We're dependent. She was pointing to this thing that I just discovered not too long ago. We're dependent. And so puts us to our knees. Are we aware how food points to our dependence as a community? When you go home, will you think differently about that? Here it is again, Mel with Nate. The distance between the breast and the mom's face is a miracle. It's the same distance that allows that the baby's eyes are naturally able to focus at that age when they're first born. Any further and it gets blurry, any closer and it gets blurry. It's kind of like me with these glasses, right? That's unbelievable. And then there's been studies that have been done on cattle and on humans that talk about or that have studied the health of the calf or the infant and the mother's intuitive response, unbeknownst to the mom, to change the chemistry in the milk that meets the needs of the baby. That's relationship. This is, it's hard, it's so much around us that we don't even, it's the air we're breathing. We just can't even fathom how significant that is. Many meals after those two, right? Learning to feed themselves, feeding one another, eating by themselves in the cafeteria, meal after meal after meal. These relationships happen. Intimacy at the table, right? I talked about it earlier. That's Jim Carrey from, I'm so sorry. It's saying, do I have something in my teeth? I'm totally blanking on the movie. If somebody can help me out. Ace Ventura, that's exactly what it is. Intimacy of friends and neighbors. This was on the right is a picture of us at the cabin below the house. When we first moved there, we were told of this story of the neighborhood picnics that would happen in August after everybody would bale hay. They would come down, line these tables up. We saw pictures of this. It was really fun. So when we renovated the cabin, we started to do that. We did it for about 5 years until the neighbors stopped coming. It just, it's a different world right now. And then another date picture that I pirated from the internet. Some meals are more intimate than others, right? This is some tradition. I mean, it's my tradition. It's what I celebrate, and some of you all may too. Do this in remembrance of me, what Jesus said. He said to eat something as a way of remembering who I am. This is all about relationship, right? Life is all about relationship. Why does this matter? Resiliency. That's the thought that's been racing through my head through our conversations a lot as of late. Resiliency is a web of resilient relationships that are able to thrive. Here's a quote by James Cassio. Resilience is all about being able to overcome the unexpected. Sustainability is about survival. The goal of resilience is to thrive. This happened recently, right? We all know that. It's an incredible tragedy for a lot of people in our community on both sides of the border. Story after story of people that are, just heard tonight, being offered $5,000 for a house. That's terrible. Terrible. It's just not, anyway. I don't want to keep stating the tragedy. We all know that. The weight of it is on us, right? One thing I want to talk about is the Lübke farm in Austria that was downwind of Chernobyl. There's one document that I can find about this. We emailed Joel Salatin right after the derailment and just started saying, can we pick your brain about this stuff? Like, we're acquainted with him. And he's actually coming to Ohio this Saturday to speak at something that we're co-sponsoring in Deerfield. But that's the point is that Joel hopefully will address some of this too. But he mentioned this Lübke farm. So we started looking for it, and we found one document about it. And it was a farm back when this happened in the 80s that had been practicing a high-intensive composting program on their farm. They would, they used animals to rotate around and do, and then they would compost in addition to that, just building organic matter over. It says in a 10-year period, the organic matter content of the clay loam soil on their farm was changed from 2% to 15%. The next line is the key. Following downwind fallout from Chernobyl nuclear reactor accident, root vegetables raised on their farm were uniquely free of radioactive contamination in comparison to other farms in the region. That's relationship. Their soil was so alive. That's the conclusion, right? The organic matter in the soil and the life that was there was resilient enough to process the radiation that came. There's more things to read there. we'll just keep going. There are other remediation options. Oyster mushrooms and oyster mushroom substrate mixed with wood chips has proven to be really good at remediation. If you've seen the Netflix documentary Fantastic Fungi, which we talked about, Paul Stamets is who's the focus of it. He actually was born and raised in Columbiana, which is kind of cool. Mentions it in the documentary. He's the focus of this documentary, and he's a world-renowned mycologist. And he said that to us. We contacted him and said, "Hey, come and help. Like, show up, do this." And he said, "Here's what I'd recommend: is mixing wood chips and blue oyster or any kind of oyster mushroom substrate together and putting it out." Now, that's an awful lot of substrate that needs to be put out. This isn't an easy task. And I don't know that it's even something that we can do. But the point that I'm trying to make is that they take toxins out of the soil and remediate them and take away the unhealth. In the middle are red wiggler worms from this Amitra University and Amitra Hospital in India. And I'll read that. A group of researchers from Amitra University conducted a research study for 5 years on the island near Amitra Hospital, which was used as a landfill and dump site for several years, causing the soil to become completely contaminated with heavy metals from both the dumped waste and from the polluted backwaters. The land was a dead zone with a striking absence of ants, insects, worms, and birds. That sounds a lot like the fields on a lot of farms that are not feeding the soil, right? Like soil's not alive. Our backyards, the way we spray our lawns, we don't facilitate life with that, right? This study concluded that it is possible to remediate the contaminated site with eco-friendly methods over a period of 5 years to such an extent that it would be possible to grow healthy food on the site. They put 24 inches of compost on this huge landfill, and then they planted all kind of plants like phytoremediation, plant remediation, and then they dumped all these red wiggler worms in there. And they turned over that soil over and over and over. They put compost down, then they covered it with soil, planted plants, put the worms in, and in 5 years it was healthy enough to plant as a vegetable garden. The resiliency in creation is key to life, and it's also key for our communities, and it's also key for our marriages and our relationships with friends. We have to build resiliency. And that takes disciplines, right? Healthy relationship. We are people from a place. We are people of relationship, and we are a resilient people. Here's a video for you. Our farm store's open on Saturdays from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. We sell good, ordinary food that's healthy and local. And you can find us on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter. Thanks for the invitation. That picture of the rooster was one of my favorite pictures ever taken on the farm. My son got it when he was like 11 years old. It was caught under the tarp by the hay bales. Questions? Thank you for letting me come and speak. I'm glad to answer questions. I threw a lot out there, but also anything about the Palestine things and how it's affected, that side, feel free. Go ahead.
A lot of I don't know how to pose this question. I think I'm convinced that your way of agriculture is the way to do things as it relates to place and all these things. But one of the arguments against it is population size, the size is do you think that this way of farming would be able to accommodate our population size because I don't know, that's a lot of like what people like. We have too many people on this earth. That's why we have to revert to like other forms of
Sure.
agriculture in order to accommodate such a large population on this earth. So I don't know if you have explored that at all, or I don't know. It's not a very good question, but
No, it's actually a great question. I'm trying to think how to answer that.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the short answer is there's a lot of, man, that's a good question. I don't want to get,
Yeah.
boo-hoo versus, well, but I just want to be careful not to just come down too hard, because I have a lot of friends that are farming, and very few of them are adding compost and, like we're trying to do. A lot of them are using chemical fertilizers, and a lot of them are using Roundup. And that's normal in our agricultural process. I think we don't even know the capacity of the earth to grow food if it was unlocked. And I think it's because most of the space, we're trying to race too far too fast and grow too much and it's like anything. It's bad, seems to be bad magic food. It's profit driven first, not even sustainable, right? As that quote was, but we want resiliency, and we want life to be a teeming in the soil. And we're not, so we don't see that model in like scale. But I think if we did, we'd be blown away by the product that could come. Absolutely. Look at a permaculture model of gardening and see the quantity of food produced on a small space. And Dave's doing a lot of that, right? And that's amazing. I just don't think we know what to look for, So I don't want to come down on anybody, but and I'm not saying we have it all. We've discovered something, and I'm going, oh my goodness, look at this. So I'll just kind of leave it at that. Other questions? Go ahead.
Do you use antibiotics on your animals?
The last time I used an antibiotic, my bull had what we thought was cancer. The vet had come in and checked him, had a kidney, thought he had a cancer in his kidney. He'd lost 400 pounds. It dropped significantly. Not the bull that was there in the picture, but a really, really nice bull we had. We used an antibiotic on him to see if we could clean that up. Obviously, we had to put him down. He didn't come back from that. We wouldn't have put him in the meat program at all for a long time. And no, we don't use antibiotics in any of our, unless it's preventative, like not preventative. It's if we see an issue and it needs to be addressed with that. I can't tell you the time before that we used antibiotics on anything. Go ahead.
You said a little bit about growing produce in order to help with cancer treatments. I know you guys have worked a little bit with that.
Do you want to answer that?
Yeah. I can do that.
Mel is actually, this is my wife, and she's, well, you can tell, Field's going.
Yeah, try to give you the Cliff Notes version, but over the course of the last 2 or 3 years, was working with some local practitioners about trying to address cancer. There's a lot of cancer in our family, and we just felt it heavy on our heart to try to do something. But, not wanting to say, like, eat grass-fed meat and it'll cure cancer. So pulling together resources, finally developing a curriculum that we thought was true and honoring to the desire to give quality of life to people, was looking to partner with Mercy Health. That fell through, and so opened it up to our general audience, the same curriculum, but to a wider perspective about disease resiliency. Same concepts that he's addressing. You can become a resilient terrain for whatever will come your way. And really that's what the curriculum's about. We've been doing it since January, meet for a year, once a month, and it's been pretty awesome.
How about the herbs? Like you're talking about an herb garden for that.
Yeah, so part of the curriculum is on our property, to create a medicinal herb garden. And I mean, I know enough people that know way more than me that I can, point people in the right direction. But there is a lot that herbs can do to help build that resiliency as well. Does that help? Is that enough? Okay. All right.
I mean, there's no silver bullet, right? It's and we have lost a lot of ground. Mel used this word picture for me the other day of a bathtub, and if we allow the water to come up in the bathtub, and then something catastrophic happens and a lot is put in there, it will overflow. If we're managing the water levels and keeping that down, when the big flood comes, it still stays in the bathtub. And that's, I think, the resiliency she's talking about and what she's talking about with people. And so herbs and produce and organic, like grown in good soil, compost soil. I mean, the mineralization, the nutrient density it's way there compared to it's planted the same thing over and over and over in this space. So I hope that helps. Okay, one more question. Yeah, please.
Do you have anything that would help, start community gardens with your practices?
That's a great question. We have a garden on the farm that is run by our garden manager, and we're educationally based. That's our priority, is to share what we know with what we have. And so allowing people to come alongside of Sarah and Marnie, the two that really work the gardens, and to learn how to, they're doing raised beds, they're composting, they have a worm bin. So they're feeding this worm compost system. Those things are very teachable and can be shared with people. And we offer workshops. She just did a pruning workshop this past weekend, and there's going to be others. But I'm looking at Dave, who's one of the best gardeners I know, and he lives here in town. I don't know if, just ask if you can peer over the fence, He's speaking at the next one. So, so as far as composting and big production stuff, I think Dave would be able to navigate that. We're adding, we get leaves from the city of Columbiana. We get wood chips from as many of the tree service people around. We pile them up on the farm, and we allow that to just work itself down. We let pigs in on the leaves so that they can eat the acorns. They're chewing that up. But you can do that all in small scale on your own and build raised beds out of that, which is predominantly what we're doing on the farm, is raised beds. They're just easier to manage. I'm not the green thumb at the farm like Sarah is and Marnie, but that's why I was like, Dave is a master at this, right? Yeah, sorry. I guess that's it. Thank you. Thanks again.